Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Gwarube, says an analysis needs to be done to see where the government's shortcomings are in terms of budget so that teaching jobs can be saved. The Western Cape Department of Education announced they'll be shedding over 2,000 jobs due to budget cuts from the national government. Joining us to discuss this further is SADTU Western Cape Provincial Secretary Sibongile Kwazi, as well as Basil Manuel. He's Executive Director at the National Professional Teachers Organisation of South Africa. Good evening to the both of you. Thank you very much for joining us on The Full View. I'm sure you've both seen the latest statement from the Western Cape Education Department stating that the 2,400 job losses will not be in the form of retrenchments, but non-renewal of contracts of teachers that come to an end in December. I'm not quite sure if that scenario is any better, though, because the gap of the 2,400 would still be there. But let's get your views. We'll start with you, Ms. Kwazi. Just give us your reaction as SADTU to that statement.
Thank you very much, Bomkazi. We understand that the jobs of contract teachers are the jobs that will be cut or terminated for next year. When we are talking about these contract teachers, people will think it's people who got into the education system yesterday. Here, we are talking about teachers who, by right, were supposed to be permanent by now. Because the collective agreement in the Education Labour Relations Council, which says that if a teacher is in a vacant substantive post and qualified for that post, they qualify for their status to be converted into a permanent status. So what we are sitting with here are people who have been in jobs for a year or even 3 years who must now leave the system because they are deemed to be on contract.
Ms. Kwazi, I'm glad you've provided that context. Before we get to the impact that this will have on teaching and learning, I just want to rope in Mr. Manuel to get his views on just that statement of clarification. Does it make the situation any better, according to you, that it will be contract workers, not necessarily retrenching of the ones that have been there on a permanent basis?
Simply put, it's a creative way of looking at it. It's absolute nonsense. These are teachers in the system. These are teachers that are needed to make schools run. So by reducing the number of teachers, of course you're retrenching. That is what it means. It doesn't mean that these are people that are not in the system. And Sibongile is absolutely correct when she says that a lot of these teachers, by virtue of the fact that we have an agreement, should have been converted to permanency. So it is cold comfort to say these are only contract workers. Yes, they are contract teachers at the moment, but they are in the system and they were part of the total pool of teachers.
But it must not be lost on us that even the Western Cape Education Department was at pains to stress that this is an undesirable situation, but they have a 3.8 budget shortfall. So what should happen, or how can they address that 3.8 budget shortfall, if we pose that question to you, Sibongile?
As part of the consultations on the basket of posts for 2025, as Labour, we have put some proposals to the employer. One of the proposals was around the Back on Track program that is run by the Western Cape Education Department. This addresses the learning losses due to COVID. But what is funny about this BOT program is that not all learners who experienced learning losses are part of the program. For the other grades, they are looking only at those top performers, which is a fraction of the learners at any school. So it's not a genuine program, because we believe that it's only a program to improve the results in later years. Again, in the BOT program, there are tutors that are not part of the education system who are employed by the same WCD who's setting posts for teachers. So we are saying that even if that board program is their flagship program. When there is a dire need for educators inside classrooms, they should put it on hold for now and provide teaching posts. The second area where we proposed that they can make savings is the annual systemic evaluation. And we are saying that in the Western Cape, there is enough data to inform any interventions to rectify the system if there are any challenges with the system. These annual systemic evaluations have been taking place for more than 20 years now, and you can't tell me that there is no data. So even if they are very proud of the program, they can put it on hold now that there are financial constraints, because that program of systemic evaluation costs millions on a yearly basis.
Mr. Manuel, your views, how can they address the 3.8? Should they put these very important programs, the Back on Track program, as well as the annual systemic evaluation, should they put these on hold to fund these teacher posts?
We don't have differences there. But in addition to that, Mfundo, we met at national level with the DG, the heads of departments of all provinces, together with Treasury, and where we put on the table an important point that we said, we understand that there are economic hardships, etc. However, we want to see that those social type departments are protected. Health, police and education. Those are ones that impact on the lives of our ordinary citizens far more than some of the other departments do. So if there are budget cuts, then we have to first look at those that don't impact on the social aspects of our people. And when we cut teachers, we are not impacting on a few people in a school that have to teach more children per class. We are impacting on the quality of learning for millions of children. And that there has to be looked at in a different light than you look at other non-social departments within government.
Basil, now that you've touched on government and its role, we've heard that what has really led to this fiscal crisis at provincial level was the decision by national government to not fully fund the 2023 wage agreement. Where do you stand on that one?
Let's be clear about this, Mfundo. Every year, a budget is drawn up and it presupposes what the percentage increase would be. So it is not exactly true, and I don't believe it fully, that in fact they budgeted for such a minuscule increase when you consider that teachers haven't had a proper increase since 2020. Since 2019, sorry. So surely it must have been foreseen that the increase will be a little better. And it wasn't so great because it was just CPI +1. And that should have been foreseen. How did the budgets come out so skewed that you budget such a little for it? Then in addition, there are frills. And I think my colleague Sibongile touched on it so beautifully. Cut the frills. Don't cut the things that will haunt us forever. Children not getting sufficient teaching. Those children who are integrated into your ordinary public school will sit lower in the desk and eventually fall through the cracks because the teacher's doing crowd control as opposed to looking at every single child in their wholesomeness. And that is where our problem lies.
Sibongile, your closing remarks?
We are calling on WCED to prioritize the teaching and learning needs of the poor working class, because this will not have the same impact on all communities. We know that it's the poor working class communities who are negatively impacted during COVID by learning losses. And they are now going to get even more learning losses. Besides that, the majority of these contract teachers who are going to lose jobs will form part of the vast number of the unemployed youth that we are complaining about as a country. We know that in South Africa, every person who is working is responsible to feed 5 other people. this does not only have an impact on the contract teachers, but on their families as well. And big classrooms will mean that the quality of teaching and learning is severely compromised, and it will result in disciplinary problems at schools, which will impact on teachers again, as well as their well-being.
Well, we most certainly did reach out to the Western Cape Education Department. Unfortunately, they were unable to deploy somebody to be part of this interview. We'll reach out to them again, and hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to have them and at least pose some of these questions or your views that perhaps they need to cut the frills, be it the Back on Track program or the annual systemic evaluation that you've spoken of, Sibongile. But thank you to the both of you for joining us this evening for this very important conversation. That's SADTU Western Cape Provincial Secretary Sibongile Kwazi and Basil Manuel. He's Executive Director at NEPTOSA, speaking to us.